both of you for coming. Thanks so much. It's great to see you in person for a change, because I know when I'm watching you on the screens, you can't see me. I've been just recently informed about that.
It's been a busy, good year.
Yeah. Talk to me about Jesse. Tell me about your son.
Well, Jesse was born 2.5 months premature. And on the third day of his life, he had a grade 4 cerebral hemorrhage. So as a result, he was quadriplegic and nonverbal. So this was 1987, so there were a lot of challenges coming up for that because it was pre-internet. I see now that parents of children with disabilities have internet communities that they're almost, it's less lonely because you immediately find a brotherhood and a sisterhood.
We had to seek parents a couple of years ahead of us who were in the same situation locally to educate ourselves.
Literally using a newsletter, like a snail mail newsletter, which seems Jurassic at this point, but that's what we did. But we faced our first challenges were against the medical community, quite frankly, who wanted to intervene and do all kinds of things. And then it was with the educational system. So we really wanted inclusion for our son. We knew
Inclusion being?
Inclusion in a public school. We wanted him to take full advantage of his basic civil right to a free and appropriate public education. But we were in New Jersey, and the preschool we were in was not an integrated preschool. He was segregated from the rest of the population.
Because often, to interrupt it, to add a little light here, often in those days, and sometimes in these days, inclusion was not inclusion. It meant often that the child would be in the room with the other students, but there wouldn't be any programming, if you will.
Absolutely.
No challenges.
Right.
Absolutely.
No challenges.
So they were meeting the letter of the law, but not necessarily educating, right?
So we moved here because Massachusetts then was above the federal average for inclusion. But the town we moved to, he was put in a collaborative. And the minute we walked in, it was as if he were a second-class citizen. He was in a room at the back, segregated. There were used
wrestling mats,
stinky wrestling mats on the wall. I was
no windows.
Horrified.
No windows to speak of.
It was, I was outraged by that. And so we wanted him and he got to visit the regular pre-K for an hour a day. It was totally, you are a second-class citizen. The minute you cross the threshold, that was the message to our son.
So what did you do?
Wow. We got an advocate, a disabilities advocate, lawyer, and we stated our concerns, and we got right to work. We were involved for a year and a half.
We were in a 1.5-year battle to get our kid his basic civil rights. What happened was he was allowed to go to the local first grade. But what happened in the local first grade was that he was not being included. And in fact, our kid, who was a sunny temperament boy, was tantruming 3 times a week. And we knew that something was going on. We found out that he was, that the aide was saying things like, he don't belong here, and between you and me, we both know where he's going to end up.
And we should say that, he went on to be a very bright student.
He was in the 99th percentile when he was tested correctly.
Once we got over the hump, he flourished.
Yes,
he just
but
flourished.
The testing, they insist, when we got into it with them, they insisted that he be tested by their person that they sent, who gave him a Stanford Binet IQ test with no adaptation for his disability.
And Chris, you make a point in the film, which I've learned a lot about the IQ test, the history of the IQ test, why it's so controversial and what it's based on. But one point that you make in the film about one of the questions that Jesse was asked, which speaks not only to the ridiculousness of the test, but also the cultural barriers that people have about the dusting and the bureau, right?
Yeah, and I'm assuming that this questionnaire was developed, I can't remember, in the 20s, the 30s, and the antiquated structure of these questions. Jesse, do you dust a dresser?
Yeah.
Well, we call we call a dresser a bureau, and Jesse certainly, we don't ask Jesse to dust, you know.
He actually laughed when he said that to him, you know.
So it was.
But his tutor, who was in there with him, came out and said, "Give me a cigarette." And I said, "You don't smoke." And then she revealed, she said, it was a standard Stanford Binet IQ test with no adaptation for his disability. And they would hold up the something he wanted Jesse to point to. And Jesse, you know, he had to tame his wavering arm to
point
and
to
he
it.
would start to point and he'd like flip it over to the next thing. And she said, and it was 3 hours. He was 6 years old, without a break.
This is one of those things that you probably wouldn't have experienced this if Jesse
Right.
hadn't
If
had
he'd been
Jesse.
verbal.
You know, my daughter had a speech delay, and during the testing, they showed her a picture of a rifle, right, and say, could you name this, right, in one of the flip cards, because they're all so antiquated,
Yeah.
right? Everybody is using these
Yes, we
things.
use that
and-
to catch our possum for dinner.
Right, every household has, well, it's actually America, so probably every household does have one. So, you know, you're coming at this from a certain level also of privilege, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
you're both educated, you both
Right.
have access to resources that other folks didn't. What kind of feelings do you have when you're realizing that this must be happening
Oh, absolutely.
to all sorts of
We
people?
have, Marianne's mother was first generation.
No, my mother was Italian.
Was
I'm
Italian.
first generation.
Your generation.
Yeah.
But Marianne often thought, well, if this was the case with Marianne's mother, who English was a second language, and they used delays, obfuscation, tech
Acronyms.
language,
How would you understand
technical
that?
language that was way above us, it would have, Marianne's mother would have given up. She
Yeah.
would have been overwhelmed,
Right.
you know, and we honestly, we talk 1,000 times how this must affect other families.
Yeah.
And
Imagine if you're a single mother and you've got 3 kids and one of them is Jesse, and you're dealing with this. You can't even get time off from work, and wow. And then add to that English isn't your first
my
language.
God, we had the luxury that both of us work out of our home.
Right.
You know, and to imagine a 9 to 5 or whatever dealing with this, it's,
Yeah.
can't imagine.
So obviously, sadly, Jesse's no longer with us. He died unexpectedly, but it must give you some solace to continue working on issues that were important to him and important to your life, and give such sustenance to other families.
We have good friends that are a little younger than us who are in the same position with their children, and I'm observing our friend's son and seeing at 3 years old with a strong disabilities, you know, working with an iPad and what he could accomplish.
Yeah.
And if Jesse had had that,
Yeah. Well, Jesse, they had a program at Boston College where they had an eye gaze computer, and they attached electrodes around
was
Jesse's
early
eyes. And
testing.
he was able to play a video game with his dad, and he won,
Beat
and he
me.
giggled all the way home. And he was also able to prove to us that he could read, because his eye would light up the words on the screen. And so the sentence that he read was, "We wanted to fly the kite, but the wind was too strong." And it was hitting up each word. And I said, "So which word up there describes you?" "Strong, strong, strong." He was 6. I knew he could read. At school, they were making him repeat the alphabet, you know? So, and then when the crazy mother says, "But he can read,"
Right.
you get the eye rolls, you know? So,
So this film focuses on a number of individuals, a number of young people who are differently intelligent, if
Yeah.
you will, that don't fit into the norms and have challenges. What do you hope folks take away after they watch the film?
I watched this film. I guess I've seen the film 5, 6, 7 times, and my one sentence summary, time and time again, with the Q&As that are asked, I look at this film and I say, it comes down to community. It comes down to community. We can do, you know, federal and state state work, but to look at these kids, these young adults, you see that it's the immediate community that comes in and assists these folks to find a means to, you know, live independently.
also, it's about presuming competence. just presuming competence, presuming that, and also
Real important.
and the end to otherizing people, and this goes for everybody, but it ends that otherizing. I see the difference. I didn't go to school with kids with disabilities or even kids of different races or whatever, and I see from Jesse's friends even now the difference that it made in their lives.
Right, we focus a lot on conversations like this about what it's doing for the individual who has a disability or who is the quote-unquote
Yeah.
other, but we often don't talk about the positive impact that diversity has on the rest of the world.
And I said over and over, Jesse is not here to inspire everybody else, because that makes me gag. But he did. I mean, the fact is, he did inspire other people, but he inspired his best friend that he met in middle school, which we were afraid to send him to, because I said, I don't know, that's when boys fight. What if they knock over his wheelchair? We were like really nervous about it. He met his best friends there, plus his girlfriend. And his best friend is now a PhD candidate in language.
Of all things.
Which is so interesting. You know?
One of the challenges too, and I think telling the story, and like I said, you know, my child had a couple of challenges, chronic illnesses. You're in a suburban town in Massachusetts, and you're fighting for resources, and you hear stories of other parents, and it's almost a requirement to challenge providers to step out of their boxes and their checklists in order to see the students and see the people as individuals who have potential, rather than what they're either required to do or what the minimum is that they can do, right?
Right.
Well, that was when I'm looking, and Marianne, you know, the business that I'm in took me away from home, sometimes months at a time. So the load was on Marianne's shoulders, but she did exactly, I think that was exactly what she did in her fight, in making these people pay attention, and she's a smart gal. I mean, she could see when the obfuscation and the delays and the tactics that they were using. Fortunately, she dealt with them really strongly, really strongly.
Not surprisingly.
Not
We
that I
wish-
didn't have
we wish-
fantasies.
and we
Not that I
just
didn't have a
wish
lot
other-
of fantasies.
I just wish other folks the same.
I brought a punching bag during that period at a
That
yard
was a good
sale.
idea.
It was.
I think so. America thanks you for that. Also, thank you for sharing the story. I mean, it's, you know, we're talking about the film, obviously, but you've, you know, written great editorials for the Boston Globe. You've got books and writings that are out. The creative process, I mean, obviously you're both actors and creators. It must be a great place for you to continue to express.
Let me, you know, Meryl Streep was on a couple of years ago, and she was talking about how art is born of empathy. If you don't have empathy, you can't create art. You cannot. And we are forever grateful to our son for that. He is our true north, and he is the one who has deepened whatever innate gifts we had.
He was our greatest teacher.
Yeah.
And he really showed us what was important. This business that we're in can be very selfish, and very
Infantilizing.
self-indulgent. But Jesse was a constant reminder of a great living the simple life. Believe it or not, you know, we live pretty normally.
I've heard that about you too. I also hear you bring, and I know you bring some humor along with the compassion to the stories. So if folks are interested in picking up Jesse, a mother's story, to know also that there's some good laughs in it as well.
I wanted to honor that about our son, because he was, as we said, the first person to get the joke at the table. So he would have enjoyed that.
Thanks so much to both of you for coming, and great to meet you. Thank you.